You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, Internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Hey, this is John Preston, Marine combat veteran and Pacific Records recording artist. Just reaching out to have you check out our new album, Battle Cry, Songs of America's Heroes, an album featuring phenomenal other combat veteran artists like Scott Brown of the Scooter Brown Band, Ryan Weaver, Rowdy Johnson, just an incredible mix of people. This is all veterans telling our stories and our lives, and we're giving 100% of our proceeds to the Valkyrie Initiative to help veterans and first responders integrate back into society. I myself have battled with post-traumatic stress for many years and lost my own brother, a Marine Corps veteran, to suicide. I ask that you step with us and make this happen. We are in pre-order right now and release on March 17th. Go to iTunes, go to Amazon, buy. We plan on making the charts and making it at a very high level, and your support right now makes a difference. This is the release of my new song, Superman Falls, which is actually about the loss of my own brother, which happened last year, and I would love for everyone to check it out, to listen, and hopefully it'll make a difference in many lives.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687. 8687.
This is Slickery Trigger for Rebel Road Tactical. With proper care and feeding, your pistol will be ready when you need it. There to save your life. Shouldn't your gear be that good? Whether you need a holster for comfortable everyday carry or a tough-as-nails holster for your next training course, Rebel Road Tactical has what you need. Check us out on the web at rebelroadtactical.com.
Sometimes riders feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
Here's George Foreman with InventHelp.
Hi, I'm George Foreman. Do you have an idea for a new product or invention? People ask me all the time, George, how do I get my idea in front of companies? How do I get a patent? What do I do next? Do you have the same questions? I'll tell you like I'll tell them all. Call my friends at InventHelp.
Call InventHelp today for free information. InventHelp has been helping inventors for more than 30 years and has sales offices nationwide. InventHelp can submit your invention to companies who are interested in receiving new ideas. If you have an idea and want to try to patent it and submit it to companies, you should call InventHelp today for free information.
Listen, I can't guarantee a company will be interested in your idea, but I believe every inventor deserves the opportunity to step into the ring and take their best shot. Put InventHelp in your corner.
To get your free inventor's information, call 1-800-353-6490. That's 1-800-353-6490. Again, 1-800-353-6490.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, Internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
My name is Jessie. I'm a United States Special Forces widow. This gives me a unique perspective on the world around us. If you're willing to listen, I'll tell you how I see it, and I won't pull any punches. This is my POV, which stands for Point of View.
All right, this is Jessie. How y'all doing today? Wait, I'm not alone. Justin, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on today.
Anytime, and thank you so much for calling in the other night. And if you didn't hear our, Wednesday night show.
Wednesday.
Yes, Wednesday night show. You've got to go back and grab it. It's on iTunes. It's on Google Play. It's on Spreaker. It's on podcast.com and 1,000 other places. Just look for Jessie's POV. And Justin called in. I made a call to him at the 11th hour to find out what his take on the psychological impact of everything going on was. Because there's been a lot going on in the world, hasn't there, Justin?
There really has. The last week or so has been very busy.
No kidding. So this time we actually have time to delve into all of it. So this started with the Syrian missile launch, right?
Yeah, at least the big things. That's probably the first one that hit. The 59 Tomahawk missiles.
Trump's sending the message loud and clear. There's a new sheriff in town.
He is. I think this is a massive warning signal. I mean, 59 sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, that's a pretty small amount, and the Tomahawk missiles are very accurate, so they're not going to be causing a lot of collateral damage, but they send a very definite message to anybody watching that the U.S. isn't playing around on this.
Okay, so I said it was the missiles heard round the world. What, in your opinion, and you've got way more of a psychological background than this crazy host here does, because you actually have a degree in psychology.
I do, yes.
And, well, I don't. I play amateur psychologist from time to time with my friends, but that's about as far as it goes, Justin. Anyway, so what was the message you think, the psychological message impact of those strikes, both with Assad, Russia, North Korea, and even China? Because he did it while he was having dinner with the President Xi Jinping of China. And I thought that took some real guts.
He did. I think his quote of eating the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake while he approved the missile strike was interesting. But as far as your question, I think the initial warning, the initial signal here is that the use of chemical weapons has consequences. I think that's the main point of this. He's sending the signal out to anybody else who may be considering the use of such weapons, whether it's chemical or biological or anything else, but using that has consequences, and the U.S. isn't going to stand idly by and let that happen. So I think that's where you have to start with this. And in particular, if you read the quotes of him talking with the Chinese President Jinping, at least it's implied that the Chinese president agreed with the strikes. So he said something to the effect of, well, if you're starting to gas children, that sort of thing, you kind of have it coming. And so I think that's the initial signal, at least the main one that was sent with these Tomahawk strikes, is that the use of chemical weapons will have consequences for you.
Okay, so the primary message was definitely geared towards Assad and Russia. Because I don't see how Russia didn't know about the chemical weapons attack in advance, given the fact that they're basically all over Syria and backing up Assad.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like they had some knowledge of it. Whether or not they knew ahead of time or knew, in the moment, I don't know. But they certainly seem to have some more knowledge of it than they let on.
And considering Russia was supposed to be the country that certified that Syria doesn't have any chemical weapons.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was a big deal, right? Back in 2013 or so, they were supposed to have gotten rid of all of the weapons. It was supposed to be verified. Even people in our own government, spoke out and said that they were verifiably gone. Russia was involved in that, and clearly, probably multiple people, dropped the ball on that and/or were lying. I don't know if it was a mistake or intentional, but clearly some mistakes were made in that process, and obviously they weren't all destroyed.
Well, my little opinion is they either weren't all destroyed or they were, but the process to make more was left in place, along with the precursor chemicals.
That's certainly possible. I mean, chemical weapons by themselves aren't actually that difficult to make, at least certain kinds. So it wouldn't take a whole lot for them to just restart the process after they had destroyed previous ones.
Right. Now, in this case, it was sarin.
Especially if they have the right laboratories.
Exactly. So if your laboratory is still sitting there intact, ready to go, and all you need to do is, okay, here's a fresh supply of ingredients, cook it up, guys. I guess here comes the next batch.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So sarin, how much do you know about sarin gas? I mean, it's a pretty brutal way to die, from what I understand.
It is. I mean, it's considered, a particularly potent nerve agent, mostly, and usually what happens is it ends up suffocating you by paralyzing your lungs, which is again particularly brutal way to go, and it can cause permanent neurological damage even if you do survive it. I mean, sarin, is particularly volatile, and it penetrates the skin very readily, and even at very low concentrations, it's considered pretty potent. It's something like 20 times more deadly than cyanide.
Wow.
So it's a very lethal gas, and it's made the news over the years because it's a fairly easy one to make. On at least in terms of chemical weapons. It was the one that was used in the Tokyo subway attacks years ago. It was used during the Iran-Iraq War. It was used. Let's see what else. It was used in 2004. There was sarin found in Iraq when we were over there. I mean, obviously in Syria, it's been used now twice. So it's popped up several times in the last couple decades.
So this isn't a new creation. It's an old enemy of sorts.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, even Nazi Germany supposedly had a fair amount of sarin production that was made. I don't think they ever actually used it. So it goes back at least to the 40s.
Okay. Well, there's also been rumors, while we're on the topic of sarin, from Japan that they think North Korea is going to hit them with the sarin gas rocket.
I saw that, yeah. You can load up a rocket with sarin gas, fire it, and it'll disperse pretty quickly in the explosion.
So this obviously isn't taken out by the fire of the actual rocket exploding.
I guess not. That's not something I'd ever really thought about. But I suppose it's all in how you do it. You can create explosions that aren't fire-based, just burst open, that type of thing. So I don't know exactly what type of rocket this would be. Because I imagine it would be burned up in certain levels of fire. Most gases are.
Right.
But I wouldn't know specifically.
Yeah, I'm no WMD expert. I'll have to reach out to one. I do have a few I can grab. They won't come on air, but they'll give me the information. So, all right. So first we throw 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles into Syria. Then, fast forward a couple days, and we drop a huge, non-penetrating bomb in Afghanistan.
Right, the MOAB.
Yes, mother of all bombs. Now, of course, that's not its official military name. But...
No, it's a massive ordnance air blast, I believe.
That is correct, Justin. And what it is, it's a huge, huge, huge bomb that explodes over the ground and does the most damage with its concussive blast. Just the shock wave from that thing is enough to destroy. And it has a 1 mile blast radius, Justin. That's pretty scary.
It is. That's pretty large.
Now, Russia claims to have a bigger, badder one, but Russia's always claiming to have something bigger and badder.
Supposedly, they designed a weapon that's essentially similar to it, but with a higher payload, I believe.
Pretty much. So, what? And then we have North Korea, and their Day of the Sun is, let's see what time it is in Pyongyang.
They'd be 12-ish hours ahead, so it'd be about 2 in the morning there.
You are accurate, my friend. It is about 2 in the morning. And they are 12 and a half hours ahead. Remember, they had to be funky.
Right.
Because Seoul is 13
They want to be on the same time
ahead.
as Seoul. Yeah.
Oh, sometimes the antics of that country are exasperating.
Certainly makes them unique.
Well, I've told you before. In my mind, Kim Jong-un is just plain quackers. He is just plain quackers, Justin. So, how well do you think Kim Jong-un is sleeping?
Well, he has to be keeping an eye on these other attacks. Obviously the Tomahawk missile one in particular, being the first major attack like this, being kind of in response to chemical weapons, which, if the rumors are true about him using the sarin gas and rockets, would directly apply to him. And obviously the use of the MOAB too, shows that just how far we're willing to go with these bombs. That's the largest one that we have in our arsenal, at least reported anyway, outside of nuclear weapons. So it certainly has to be something that he's keeping his eye on, because he knows that the U.S. really isn't playing around on this, and we're willing to use even up to this 11-ton bomb to get to force our point.
Right, and I read that our arsenal supply of MOABs, well, before the other day, was at 15. I'd have to say it's at 14 now.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'd also picked up in the news that the military had wanted to use MOAB for a couple of years now and couldn't get the authorization. And what Trump said the other day was he just basically told the military, you're the experts, do what you do and keep me in the loop. In fact, I've got that audio clip. It's not the greatest because it was at a photo op, but let's take a quick listen.
And what I do is I authorize my military. We have the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing. And frankly, that's why they've been so successful lately. If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare that really to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference. So we have incredible leaders in the military, and we have incredible military, and we are very proud of them, and this was another very, very successful mission.
And that was in reference to the MOAB, because he got asked at the photo op, did you personally authorize the use of that weapon? And I'd have to say, right. Not specifically. He just pretty much said, do what you need to do to solve this problem.
Yeah, and that sounds about right.
He doesn't seem to be the micromanaging type, does he, Justin?
No, I think that probably plays over from his career in business.
Yeah, no business manager that I know of has time to micromanage everything. They can try, but it usually doesn't end well. So, if you're Kim Jong-un and you want to do your 6th nuclear test to honor your grandfather on Day of the Sun, keep in mind, Pyongyang has evacuated approximately 25% of their people. They are putting on a spectacle for the world. They've got international reporters over there. Are you still going to go forward with it? Are you going to switch to something maybe a little less provocative? I know if I was Kim Jong-un and I'd just seen both 59 cruise missiles thrown by the United States into Syria, and then this crazy MOAB bomb, especially when you consider North Korea uses tunnels to test their nuclear weapons, and the MOAB is a tunnel buster. I'd be a little bit uneasy.
Yeah, it would certainly have to be playing into his mind. I think Yeah, I think the one thing we have to understand here is while he does come across as crazy at times, you really can't underestimate him. I mean, his family has run North Korea for years, decades, for good reason. I mean, they do have some strategic sense behind what they're doing. I mean, the whole point of the weapons program is just so that they don't end up like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, who we were able to kind of march all over because they didn't have the capabilities that the North Koreans do. And so you have to ask yourself, would the U.S. have gone into, Gaddafi if, he had nuclear weapons? And so these tests, in a sense, are kind of a signal of their strength. Trying to show that, hey, we're not going to be pushovers like other places that the U.S. and other countries have gone into. And it allows him to show that he allows him to at least present himself as the strong leader, at least militarily. And the more dangerous it presents itself, the more it kind of can hold off, potential threats. At least that's the idea. So there is some strategy behind these tests, and that showing that their military weapons program is still advancing, that they're getting stronger, and in particular, they want to keep countries like China on their side. They don't want to lose that. So it's while these things certainly have to be on his mind, especially as the U.S. moves battleships closer and we're starting to show more willingness to drop these bombs, it has to play into his decisions. But I don't know that it necessarily changes his overall strategy of presenting himself as a strong state that can deter military intervention.
Okay. Now, here's the other interesting thing. We mentioned the number 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles is the number that was launched into Syria. We have two destroyers. The payload on those destroyers is a combined 70 Tomahawk. And they are off the North Korean peninsula as we speak, Justin. They are well within striking distance. Now, I also heard that another resupply ship with 154 Tomahawks was en route.
North Korea has to be keeping their eyes on those as well then, too, particularly because the Tomahawks are known for being very accurate missiles. They don't have the massive payloads of some of the others, but they're incredibly accurate, and they destroy what they want to destroy.
Right, because they are GPS guided.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there was about between 6 and 10 casualties, depending on how you want to spin it, from the 59 launched into Syria. Well, I'm sorry, 59 missiles, maximum 10 casualties, 4 soldiers, 6 civilians. I'd say those are pretty small numbers, wouldn't you?
They are, and there's a lot of possible explanations for that, but it certainly the casualty count was pretty low for having 59 missiles.
And that just shows how accurate they are. The fact that they were launched at 4:30 in the morning in Syria time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it was done when it was done. All right, so what impact do you think this psychologically has on other world leaders who may be looking to pick a fight? What do you think Putin is thinking when he watched us basically blow up one of the bases of his ally, and Rex Tillerson's coming out and saying, our relations can't improve with you, Russia, until you get right on out of Crimea?
Yeah, I think Russia is kind of the big question mark in all of this. I mean, you hear stories of other countries, privately wishing the U.S., well and saying thank you for doing this. But when it comes to Russia, I think Tillerson was the one who said, the relationships there are at a low point, right?
Yes,
and
all-time
in particular
low.
All-time low. Russia is also on the side of Assad. They're the ones who came out and said that this, chemical attack was staged. I think just today that I was reading a story that where they claimed the evidence for it being staged is growing. I don't know. So they are clearly on the other side of this, which makes them the kind of the big unknown in all of this.
It essentially, in my terms, makes them Syria's big brother. Syria's overprotective big brother.
In a way, they kind of are. I wonder though that they don't really necessarily care about Syria. I mean, obviously they care about their access to the Mediterranean ports there. So I don't know that it's necessarily that they care about Assad specifically, but he is a friend of theirs who has allowed them access to places that they need.
He's a strategic friend.
Sorry, go ahead.
He's a strategic friend. He's happens to be a friend who's willing to give us what we need, so we'll keep him as a friend. He stops being useful, he's no longer a friend.
Exactly. And so I think, going forward, we need to show him that, Assad is not a friend, that get his interests out of there. The Russian Foreign Ministry called the strike, an obvious violation of international law. So they're trying to appeal to the kind of international community on this. But at the same time, I'm not sure Russia wants to escalate things. I don't think that's what they're after right now anyway.
So you think Russia's just going to kind of block UN resolutions, do some diplomatic maneuvering?
I think so. Putin he's ex-KGB. He's very intelligent. People compare him to kind of the chess mastermind, trying to play all the pieces from behind the scenes. I think he's more likely to try to do that sort of diplomatic maneuvering, at least initially. I don't think he wants a war at the moment, militarily. He's too smart to want to go head-to-head with the United States right now. Russia, they're growing in strength, but they're, ever since the Soviet Union fell, they've been pretty weak, and they're just now starting to reach levels where they could potentially challenge. I'm not sure he's quite ready for that.
Right.
But from a diplomatic perspective, there's a lot of things he can do, particularly as a veto player in the UN.
Right, because just to remind my listeners, there are 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the United Nations Security Council. We are one, Russia's another. Now, I will say an interesting thing happened with China, who usually votes with Russia. They are more oftentimes in lockstep, but they abstained. They said,
well, that's very interesting.
Do tell.
As you said, they and Russia tend to go hand in hand on these type of things. If Russia vetoes something, so does China. They always seem to vote the same way. But that combined with his meeting with Trump, the Chinese president Xi Jinping's meeting with Trump, and some of the signals, particularly over with North Korea, might suggest a possible change of heart. I don't want to go too far down that path because I still think they're still allied with Russia for most things. But I think we might be starting to see a slight change of heart as they are realizing some of the real threats that, say, some of these terrorist groups are posing. North Korea is posing. I think they're realizing that an alliance with the United States, at least in certain capacities, wouldn't be the worst thing.
Well, I got to admit, I find it fascinating on the fact that Russia, Syria, and Iran strongly warned the United States against launching new strikes on Syria and called for an international probe into last week's chemical attack, and then said, nope, UN, we're going to veto your resolution to provide that unbiased investigation. Yeah, it tells me they either are guilty as all get out or just don't care.
Right. Because the resolution they vetoed specifically said that Syrians need to cooperate with an inquiry about this, gas attack, and they vetoed that. So that's certainly troubling, I would say.
I would say it's extremely troubling because it tells me they are cooking up the evidence to try and show the world, oh, it was the rebels, or as they call them, terrorists.
Right. From the beginning on this, they've claimed that the chemicals belong to terrorists. The airstrike hit a warehouse that released the chemicals, and then the chemicals, traveled and hit these people. None of that story makes a lot of sense. But that's kind of what they've stuck with from the beginning, is that the chemicals belong to the terrorists and not to Assad. And obviously now they're vetoing this resolution that Assad would have to cooperate in the investigation. So none of that really fits.
Right. It doesn't fit with especially when the U.S. announced that they watched the planes take off on some form of either satellite or radar or something. and they watched the bombing happen, and then out came the attacks of the chemical weapons.
Right.
So, and now Kim Jong-un is purportedly, and I'm going off the news, no special insight here, folks, purportedly saying that, Japan's kind of saying, well, Kim Jong-un is going to launch a sarin-tipped gas rocket at us. And I really don't know if Kim Jong-un is going to be crazy enough to launch a chemical weapons attack after what he saw in Syria. He may throw some artillery into the sea, but I don't think he's going to be crazy enough.
I don't think so either. Like I said, he often does things that don't make sense to us, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have strategy behind them. Like I said, he wouldn't have such control over his country if he was truly insane. So he's somebody you can't underestimate. But I also would agree with you. I don't think he's crazy enough to launch an attack against the United States, particularly anything involving chemical weapons, because that would lose China's support. And he relies so heavily on their backing to deter the United States that I don't think it's in his best interest. And I think he would know that too.
And China recently sent an envoy to North Korea after Xi Jinping met with Trump and told North Korea to knock it off. Yeah,
so combining that with some of the other things China's done, I think North Korea is looking at China as they might be starting to lose, their one major ally. And that has to be concerning for the Kim family as well.
I agree. I mean, like I said, if I was Kim Jong-un, I'm not sure I'd be sleeping too soundly. Not to mention his North Korea, in my estimation, killed Kim Jong-nam, who was viewed as a moderate. So it's like, they took out the next Kim that could have taken over and done things in more of a common sense way.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. I mean, there's a lot of questions about why he was killed, but he was certainly more Western oriented, a little bit less dictatorial, I guess you would say. At least that's the rumor.
The other thing I found interesting, and I don't know if you've heard this, is I was watching the most recent Operation Inherent Resolve update. Now, the spokesperson up until recently has been openly willing to comment on the U.S.-Russia deconfliction channel. This time, he wasn't willing to even say if it was up in operation. Now, I also heard from a flyer the other day, and I'll read you his exact quote. He's a Danish pilot who flies what he calls bullets and beans, in other words, supply missions into the region for the Danish troops doing their job over there. Mm-hmm. And he says, quote unquote, Russia has permanently suspended this Syrian flight safety MOU, flight plan deconfliction channel with the U.S. coalition, and added a new nifty missile defense system that we or anyone else who don't have the safe friendly codes for. So and then he goes on to say, driving out or staying below 250 feet will be the best way to exit out of Syria for a while. Not even sure if our countermeasures will work against the modified S-300 systems. Not sure when we'll know if we're safe against it, in case anyone was thinking we could offer a pickup service. So, and that is actually from a pilot who flies in this region.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, he's definitely got some guts. But, like I said, I think it was interesting, so.
Yeah, very interesting.
But, and then when you combine that with the fact that Colonel John Dorian, the spokesperson for Operation Inherent Resolve, would not say anything about it, whether it was even up or not, that leads me to believe it's not in operation.
Yeah, it certainly would sound like that.
So, I mean, I'm just kind of reading between the lines here right along with you, Justin, but, I mean, he was very adamant. I will not give any statement about the deconfliction zone. We believe we are deconflicted. We don't need to talk about it and give regular updates. In my mind, that's a pretty telling statement.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's him saying, none of your business, folks. and we will take care of it in our own way. Now, also, I do understand with trying to keep secret information secret.
Sure.
But the status of that deconfliction channel up until recently has not been considered a piece of information to keep away from the media, up until we bombed Syria.
Right.
He has spoken about it. I could pull up numerous audio clips where he said, yep, it's up and running, no problem. And then he suddenly goes mute.
Mm-hmm.
Houston, it ain't running anymore.
Yeah.
At least that's how I take it. So what do you think, and I know your speculation is probably as good as mine on this, do you think Kim Jong-un is going to proceed with the nuclear test? Because everybody's sitting going, what?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Personally, I think it's probably 50-50 at this point. I could certainly understand why he would want to demonstrate, this element of strength as a hopeful deterrence. But they've announced these major events before, and they've frequently been kind of underwhelming. And so it wouldn't surprise me if this big event is some other type of test. I mean, I assume he'll go forward with some type of test, whether it's a nuclear test or maybe an ICBM test or some other type of missile test. I don't know. I could certainly see him, announcing this big event and turning it into like an ICBM test, which would not be a nuclear test per se, but it would demonstrate, an ability to launch weapons further than they ever have before.
Right.
And something like that, I think, would be kind of a compromise for him, where he's not crossing the line into testing a WMD, but he is still demonstrating improved North Korean strength.
Okay. Well, the Pyongyang testing area, which is North Korea's nuclear test zone, the tunnel's been sealed, and they always do that before the nuclear test.
Well, maybe he will. I mean, I guess I would not be surprised either way. I think you could make a strategic case for him both testing it and not testing it, depending on what his mindset is like.
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me if that happens.
I don't think it would surprise anybody.
North Korea has said if they're ready for any response they get from the U.S. or others. So I don't know if that's a bluff or not. They've certainly bluffed in the past on some of those things.
Right. I mean, that's what kind of keeps them interesting. You never know when they're telling the truth and when they're pulling your leg.
Right. And so like I said, it would not surprise me if this is a nuclear test. It wouldn't surprise me if it's an ICBM or even something lesser too.
I mean, but I think
it also wouldn't surprise me to see a failed test if that comes up. They've had that a couple of times too, where they test something and it doesn't work, but it still kind of demonstrates that they're working on it.
I'd have to say if they're going to do anything, that's something they've already tested, because you don't want to dishonor your grandfather with a failed test. If he has to go
yeah, I mean that's true, and they have had, like I said, they had a failed test maybe 5 years ago that was around the Day of the Sun. They were testing some new missile and it didn't go the way they wanted. So they've had failed tests before around this holiday that were kind of duds. So I would assume they wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
Kind of have to wait and see.
I mean, you got to admit, it makes for interesting news watching. And they have already tested ICBMs in the past. They just did it under the guise of, we're launching a satellite into space. Now, I'm not sure that any of their satellites have ever achieved stable orbit.
No, I don't. Well, I guess I'm not sure. I'm not positive on that, but I don't think so.
And I will say in January, a North Korean official came out and said Pyongyang could launch an ICBM any time. And there have been reports of ICBMs on launchers, that kind of thing. Now, how close he is, I don't know.
I mean, I think the bigger threat, too, is this wouldn't even be a tunnel test, but would be a submarine test. I mean, those are notoriously hard to track. If they showed capability to launch from a submarine, that's I think a much bigger deal than testing in a tunnel.
I think so too. And then the other thing you've got to take into account is, per our agreement with South Korea, we won't launch a serious strike into North Korea because so to keep the North Koreans from running over the DMZ into South Korea, because Seoul's only about 30 miles from the DMZ. And so what do you think the South Koreans are doing in the middle of all this? Are they panicking?
Yeah. That's tough, because South Korea is kind of the one big bargaining chip that North Korea has, right? They aren't really capable of hitting the United States. Maybe Hawaii, but we'd most likely be able to stop that before it hit. They're not shooting north. Japan is a possibility, but even that's just far enough away that you could probably shoot something down if you had fair warning. But Seoul is the one spot that's close enough that they could feasibly hit it with just about anything. And so, from a South Korean perspective, I would imagine panic's probably not the right word, but they have to be in very close communication with the U.S., who's one of their big allies, making sure, hey, you've got our backs on this, right? Because that's the biggest bargaining chip that I think North Korea has is they can hold South Korea pretty much hostage because they're so close to each other.
Right, and I've seen articles coming out from the South and about the South. First of all, they're in the middle of a presidential election, and this was a forced, not a scheduled, because Park Geun-hye was impeached and given the boot out of office, and she's been she's on trial for, well, the trial hasn't started yet, but she's going to be facing graft and bribery and influence peddling and that kind of thing.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is Mike Pence is leaving Washington on Saturday for an 11-day trip. And like I said, I don't tell tales out of school, so obviously I saw it on the news. And he is going, his first stop is in South Korea. Now, do you think Trump is going to launch anything into North Korea while Pence is in South Korea?
I think that would be incredibly risky. I guess I see this trip as more about reassuring the South Koreans than anything, right? It's kind of reinforcing that commitment to our security alliance with the South Koreans. Because that's a very key partnership, and South Korea relies on us pretty heavily, particularly in a defense capacity with the Kims just across the border. So
right.
I guess I see it more as a reinforcement or a recommitment, I guess, to that security than anything. As to whether or not the U.S. would do something with the vice president just across the border there, I think it would depend on whether or not we think we could disable any sort of counterstrike in time.
Right.
Because the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world doesn't matter if you can't launch after a first strike, right? So if you could destroy the launch pads, it doesn't matter what weapons they have if they can't launch them. So it depends how far along they are in that second strike capability, and whether or not the U.S. thinks we can take them out with one strike or not.
Plus, then there's the fact of the sheer volume of North Korean forces.
Sure, and I think Trump is making a big show of force here. I don't see him launching any sort of preemptive anything. I don't think that would be the smart move at this point. I think it would justify a lot of what North Korea is saying is, these Western imperialists trying to come in and interfere in our business, and it would give North Korea, legitimization to launch something back, at least in their minds and their allies, which could potentially be China, would also be Iran, and some other places as well. But I don't see any sort of preemptive strike happening, at least from the U.S.
Okay. I think Pence's trip is either going to be just before or just after we do something to North Korea. And I got to say one thing. If North Korea wants to go there, we'll end the Korean War once and for all. Because
I think it would be a mistake if the U.S. launches something preemptively, but I think it would be a very big mistake too if North Korea tried to do anything. As long as they're testing on their own soil, that's one thing. But if they ever tried to launch some sort of preemptive strike elsewhere, which they have threatened, but if they actually went through with it, I don't see how that ends well for them at all. Especially if it's a nuclear strike, because that would lose the Chinese. they'd be all on their own against some of the most massive forces in the world. I don't see that. I mean, that would be a suicide strike on their part. Essentially, I don't see that being something that they would be willing to do either, no matter how much they rattle their sabers and threaten us with it.
Right. I don't see them willing to actually strike first on something, especially not something other than conventional. Now,
right.
I will say that North Korea definitely is somewhat unpredictable. And yes, that makes them fun to analyze, but also makes them a challenge. And a nuclear test on their own soil is one thing. I don't know that they're going to be stupid enough to let something hit Japan proper or any of the Japanese islands. And I really don't think they're going to be crazy enough to launch into South Korea.
Right. I think that would be a massive miscalculation on their part if they tried to do that.
I mean, yes, their military is one of the largest, and I think someone out there, fact check me if I'm wrong, the fourth largest in the world at 1.2 million. And that's a lot of bodies. And the fact that Seoul is so close to the DMZ, it's just insane. So, I mean, I've been to the DMZ. I've made that trip. Fascinating trip. Definitely fascinating. But you can definitely feel the tension when you're up there. I mean, there's literally a 16-inch, I think it is, wide concrete, looks like a step. And that is the actual border. You don't step across it except when you're on the tour and you're inside the Military Armistice Commission building. Because then what they do, the process of getting the building ready for the tours, 2 South Korean soldiers to go in to lock the door. One braces himself against the wall and links arm with the one who's actually throwing the lock to prevent North Korean soldiers from reaching in and trying to drag the South Korean across to the north.
Oh, wow.
That's how seriously they take this. Well, the North Korea has tried to drag soldiers off the DMZ to their side before. That's not unheard of or unprecedented.
Right.
But yes, you do get to technically step onto North Korean soil inside the safety of the Military Armistice Commission building. Now, I do a little bit of YouTube trolling, Justin, and I was watching this idiot tourist at the DMZ. He was standing next to the concrete barrier and jumping over it, which, I'm sorry, it's only about 4 inches high, so it's no big deal to jump over it. But I'd have to say it was stupid because, and I don't know if the guy lived or died, but he jumps a couple times, and then you hear a single shot ring out. Yes, and he was doing this out in the open, not inside the Military Armistice Commission building, and I'm sorry, that's just stupid. So, but I'm sorry, you just don't jump across the border into North Korea. That's just an idiot move at the DMZ.
Oh yeah, it definitely is.
Like I said, don't know if he was shot or by whom, but China's telling North Korea to back off. We've sent enough signals to get North Korea to back off. Now, what do you think Assad's doing? Do you think he's planning his next chemical weapons attack, or he is trying to let the hubbub from this one die down?
I suspect he's going to let the hubbub from this one die down. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of incentive for him to use the chemical attack, in the first place. If you actually look at it, he was probably winning that war against the rebels using conventional military, warfare prior to the attack, which tells you the attack was probably more about his own hubris and ego than anything else. And I think he's now seeing, there may be consequences for that. So my guess is he's going to go back to conventional military. He doesn't want to risk, another attack that can definitely be traced back to him 100%, proven even to the Russians, etc., and to the rest of the world. I don't think that's a risk he wants to take at this point after seeing the Tomahawk. But I think that will renew kind of in him a sense of purpose in conventional military weaponry and warfare as well. I see him focusing a lot more on that side of the battle.
Right. So, I mean, now that I could see him going back to the barrel bombs.
Yes, that would be a possibility, yeah.
So, I mean, it's a conventional thing unless he fills them with chlorine gas again, which he's done that one too. But
He has. I'm not sure I see him risking that, at least at this point. He's already drawn enough international attention. He's obviously drawn some Tomahawk missiles. And like I said, I think he was kind of at least on the verge of winning the war against the rebels anyway without it. I just see him going back to that going forward.
Right. Now, I gotta say, here's the other thing I find interesting. Not all Koreans want to reunify the peninsula.
Yes, I've heard that.
And I can explain why. What happened in Germany when they reunified? Their economy did what for a number of years?
Oh, it tanked. Because all of a sudden you have a bunch of, you have a good economy suddenly having to struggle to pull up a bad economy, and everything tanks for a period of time as they adjust.
Right, and there are even Koreans who go, we don't want to go through that. And that would be the best case reunion. That's a best case scenario, would be something like the reunification of Germany. I mean, now it would give South Korea access to the natural resources in North Korea, but what would be the cost in blood and treasure to do it? And people don't remember a lot of times. There was never a peace treaty signed, right, between North and South Korea. They are technically at war. Right. It was a ceasefire. Yeah,
right. So from like a legal perspective, the war never ended, right?
Right. On paper, the war never ended. So that means, we are technically still at war with North Korea. Now, I could see Trump deciding to try and teach him a lesson, but I think the only thing that would stop him would be South Korea.
Well, war has changed over the years, too. Nobody declares war anymore like we did in Korea or Vietnam. Actually, Vietnam wasn't. It was a little different, too. But we don't declare war so much anymore. We haven't declared war in decades, even though we're in more countries now than we've ever been. And so, like, the very legal concept of war is not what it used to be. So I don't know that we'll ever go back to that time period where we have to declare war and then officially sign ceasefires to end the war. It's just a very different world nowadays than when we used to make legal declarations of war in kind of an international relations context.
All right, Justin, I'd like you to hang on for a minute while we take a brief commercial break, and then after that, I'd like you to tell me what you think about whether all this stuff is going to bring about the next World War III.
All right.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Hey, this is John Preston, Marine combat veteran and Pacific Records recording artist. Just reaching out to have you check out our new album, Battle Cry, Songs of America's Heroes, an album featuring phenomenal other combat veteran artists like Scott Brown of the Scooter Brown Band, Ryan Weaver, Rowdy Johnson, just an incredible mix of people. This is all veterans telling our stories and our lives, and we're giving 100% of our proceeds to the Valkyrie Initiative to help veterans and first responders integrate back into society. I myself have battled with post-traumatic stress for many years and lost my own brother, a Marine Corps veteran, to suicide. I ask that you step with us and make this happen. We are in pre-order right now and release on March 17th. Go to iTunes, go to Amazon, buy. We plan on making the charts and making it at a very high level, and your support right now makes a difference. This is the release of my new song, Superman Falls, which is actually about the loss of my own brother, which happened last year, and I would love for everyone to check it out, to listen, and hopefully it'll make a difference in many lives.
Here's George Foreman with InventHelp.
Hi, I'm George Foreman. Do you have an idea for a new product or invention? People ask me all the time, George, how do I get my idea in front of companies? How do I get a patent? What do I do next? Do you have the same questions? I'll tell you like I'll tell them all. Call my friends at InventHelp.
Call InventHelp today for free information. InventHelp has been helping inventors for more than 30 years and has sales offices nationwide. InventHelp can submit your invention to companies who are interested in receiving new ideas. If you have an idea and want to try to patent it and submit it to companies, you should call InventHelp today for free information.
Listen, I can't guarantee a company will be interested in your idea, but I believe every inventor deserves the opportunity to step into the ring and take their best shot. Put InventHelp in your corner.
To get your free inventor's information, call 1-800-353-6490. That's 1-800-353-6490. Again, 1-800-353-6490.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
This is Slickery Trigger for Rebel Road Tactical. With proper care and feeding, your pistol will be ready when you need it, there to save your life. Shouldn't your gear be that good? Whether you need a holster for comfortable everyday carry or a tough-as-nails holster for your next training course, Rebel Road Tactical has what you need. Check us out on the web at rebelroadtactical.com.
Tired of paying outrageous prices for Viagra? Well, we have great news for you. Now you can finally get Viagra at huge discounts. Healthy Man allows you to save up to $500 on Viagra. Why pay U.S. pharmacy prices of $15 per pill or more when you can get Viagra for less than $3 a pill? Call today and get 40 Viagra pills for only $99. This can cost as much as $600 at your local pharmacy. You can't afford not to call us. If you want Viagra at the lowest prices, never pay $15 a pill pharmacy prices again. Get Viagra for less than $3 a pill. Call 1-800-516-7602 today and save up to $500 and get 40 pills for just $99. Healthy Man is fast, easy, and affordable. Operators are waiting at 1-800-516-7602 to take your call right now. Call 1-800-516-7602. That's 1-800-516-7602. Again, 1-800-516-7602.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me over that commercial break. I am still here with Justin Kinney, my favorite recurring guest. So, Justin, do you think between the attacks against Syria and their big brother Russia and the MOAB we just dropped in Afghanistan, and for those of you who don't remember your Middle East scorecard, let me just remind them of that one, Justin, then I'll let you get on with your analysis here. Bashar al-Assad is propped up by Russia and Iran. Russia and Iran are friends. Then, Iran and North Korea are trading partners, at least on missile technology and who knows what else. And then you have China and North Korea. Now, China's told North Korea recently to back off and slow it down. And that was after China's president met with Trump. And the most recent development in this little scorecard, folks, is that the United States proposed a resolution at the UN for an investigation into the chemical weapons attack in Syria. China normally would vote to side with Russia. However, the most recent one, they abstained. All right, Justin, that was the world events in a nutshell lately. What do you think we are headed for World War III?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question. I mean, obviously, that's something that's on a lot of people's mind. I saw a news story just recently that showed, Google searches for the phrase World War III are at an all-time high. People are obviously concerned about this with all the things you just mentioned going on. Russian relations with Russia all-time low, Syria, North Korea, MOAB in Afghanistan. And it's a really good question. And I think we are probably closer to it than we've been in recent years, but I don't think we're as close as we were during the Cold War. At certain times during the Cuban Missile Crisis and things, we were a button push away from it.
Really?
And it never happened. Yeah, I mean, there's stories of, the hands being on the button to launch a missile, and deciding not to at the last minute. There was a case once of there was a mistaken alarm that went off telling us that Russian missiles were headed our way, and we were all set. We had people in the planes ready to take off to launch a war, and then somebody decided to check and found out that someone had accidentally launched a training program, and that's what set the alarms off. And so we've been a lot closer to World War III than I think we are now. That said, tensions have certainly ramped up, and so the concern is higher now than it's been, in probably a couple of decades, that something could happen, particularly with the threat from North Korea of launching a preemptive strike. And obviously there's been rumors of Trump wanting to do that. I don't think he would, but there's been rumors of that. And I think if a preemptive strike happens, the conditions are right for something to spiral out of control into a world war. The question, of course, is if that preemptive strike would ever happen. And I don't see it happening personally. I think both sides are intelligent enough to recognize what a preemptive strike would do. In particular, I think if the North Koreans launched a preemptive strike, that would not go well for them at all. I don't see them gaining anybody on their side if they launched a preemptive strike. On the flip side, though, if the U.S. launched one, and again, I don't think they will, but if we did, I think that would be a lot more divisive worldwide. I think that could be a trigger that spawns a lot of people on both sides getting riled up.
Okay, so you think North Korea may be the keystone as to whether or not we go into World War III? It's
certainly possible. I mean, I think to an extent you could point to the crisis in Syria right now. If World War III does take place, the crisis in Syria is really where it started. I think there was a civil war. It's already spiraled into the point where there are dozens of nations involved in some capacity. It's still very minor at this point and contained to one. Well, minor in the sense of only one location. If anything, it goes back to Syria. Now, North Korea could potentially be the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back, in the sense that it might be the final spark. But if it does boil over into something larger, I think you point to Syria as being the breeding ground for it, that made the international situation ripe for such a war.
Okay. I don't think Trump wants to be remembered as a wartime president, but I don't think he's willing to take crap from anybody, though.
No, I mean, he campaigned as a non-interventionalist. He almost campaigned as a peace president in a sense. But at the same time, like, you're right, he's not somebody who sits back and takes insults very, very well. He's not somebody who wants to take abuse from others. He wants to be perceived as strong, as do most leaders, I would argue. But him in particular, he seems to be motivated by this idea of wanting to be seen as a strong leader. And there are scenarios in which it could boil over into something much larger. I personally kind of doubt it, at least right now, although we are certainly moving in that direction in terms of the growing tensions and concerns from a lot of different places. It's a dangerous situation. Again, I don't think it's as dangerous as it was during certain times in the Cold War, but we are moving in that general direction.
Interesting side note, Justin, to all this. Up until a few years ago, we were communicating with North Korea over a World War II era field telephone.
Okay.
We made a gift to North Korea. Yes, the U.S. actually gave something to North Korea. We gave them a little piece of technology. We gave them a fax machine. I found that fascinating. We gave them a fax machine so we could communicate with them in writing.
That is interesting.
And I actually saw a video where 5 U.S. military personnel crossed the DMZ to service the fax machine. 5.
Really?
Yes. A translator, a technician, and 3 people to guard.
That's very interesting.
I thought you might not have picked up on that little tiny tidbit.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that. That's very interesting. I like that.
I found it very fascinating. So it's clear we don't necessarily want war with North. We don't want to restart the Korean conflict and end it, or Korean War, or whatever you want to call it, as in a hot zone. We don't want to have bullets flying over there. but we're not going to sit back and take whatever North Korea throws around the world or at us or South Korea or Japan lying down. That's my take on it.
Mm-hmm.
And remember that old, quote, red line to the Soviet Union back in the days you were referencing, the Cuban Missile Crisis and all that?
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to why I think we gave North Korea a fax machine. It was actually a teletype machine. It wasn't a phone line.
Oh, was it?
Yes. So it was also done all in writing. That way there could be no confusion among what was actually said. And we gave North Korea the modern version of a teletype. We gave them a fax machine. So I don't think we necessarily want it, but if they're crazy enough to start it, I think we'll end it.
Yeah, and I think it's much less likely to spiral out of control if North Korea starts things, because they would be seen as the aggressor and not have really any allies on their side.
Right. Now, do you think it would end in a result in a unified Korea, or China running what is currently North Korea?
That's a good question. It may depend on whether or not China decides to help out in stopping North Korea. If they ally, with the United States and whoever else, that they may be given that territory as compensation for helping. If they don't, then I could see it resulting in more of in that being all Korean territory. But I think it would depend a lot on what China does in response.
Right. Now, China has deployed troops to their border with North Korea, and the reason everyone is assuming it is to prevent an onslaught of refugees from North Korea flooding into China in the event of some retaliation by the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, North Korea, you made your bed, now you gotta lie in it. Now, people are saying that Donald Trump and his famous or infamous, take it how you will, Twitter account is only adding fuel to the fire. Why?
Yes.
Does Trump continue to send out these messages? Is it just to feed his own ego?
Honestly, I suspect it is more than anything. I mean, there is strategy to putting yourself out there. There's an element of closeness when the president of the country can actually send out personal messages to the people. There are some strategies behind it. There's a reason Obama, tweeted. He occasionally would, post tweets on his own too. So I don't think the actual act of tweeting is necessarily about ego as much as it is about this connection between the leadership and the people. It engenders a sense of connection that shows that it's not just the elites running the country. They actually do communicate with the average person too. But Trump's tweets are obviously a big source of contention and among a lot of people because of some of the things that he tweets more than anything.
Right.
I do think a lot of that is his own ego. I think a lot of the criticism against him would go away if he would tone some of that back. I kind of wish his wife and his kids could rein that in a little bit. I don't think he necessarily needs to stop tweeting, but a lot of his problems I think would go away if he was able to tone back the way he tweets and how often tweeting things about his enemies at 3 a.m. When his enemies are the news or whatever. I don't think that's good for his image. I don't think that engenders a lot of confidence.
Okay, I can go along with that. Now, just to remind folks, the most recent nuclear test in North Korea was the equivalent to a 10 kiloton blast, and that was in September of 2016. Now, 10 kilotons is not insignificant when you're discussing a nuclear weapon, Justin.
No, that's pretty good size.
So, if they do another nuclear test, I'm suspecting it will be larger than 10 kilotons. So, that's just my suspicion. So, now, also, if you look at North Korea's military parades, they've shown some rockets that were patently fake. They've shown some missiles and some rockets that never could have even flown, just to have something propaganda-wise to put out there. But then their ICBMs that they've been showing recently have been more real than not, but the design kept changing. So And I'm referring to the KN-14 or Hwasong-14. And it's purportedly a two-stage fueled ICBM, first revealed in 2015. And the two stages control the missile's boost and guidance. It has an estimated range of 8,000 kilometers or 5,000 miles. So it has a re-entry vehicle that could be outfitted to hold either a nuclear warhead or a chem bioweapon. So, and then of course you can't forget the Musadon, which is a mobile intermediate range ballistic missile. Oh yes, intermediate. Which intermediate means 3,500 kilometers or 2,150 miles. So I find it very interesting that now most of the time their Musadon tests do end in failure. They've had 3 successful Musadons tests.
Okay.
Now, my concern is North Korea gets the bomb, the rocket, and the bomb. They're trading partners with who? Iran. Does Iran suddenly pop up with a nuclear-tipped ICBM?
Well, that would be a concern, and we do know that they have traded in the past. It's thought that some of the Iranian nuclear technology they have now originated with North Korea. We know they have tried to get nuclear weapons that way as well. So it would not be out of the realm of possibility to see things like that pass from one country to another.
Right, especially 2 of the most ostracized until recently and sanctioned countries in the world. It makes them almost natural allies. Now, a lot of the sanctions in Iran have been lifted. Now, what's been fascinating is I've been watching Iranian politics, Justin. Ahmadinejad has just registered against the advice of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, to run for president of Iran again.
Right.
What's that say? I mean, the psychology behind that has got to be fascinating. And then he went on to call the leader's public comments suggestions. You just called the Ayatollah's advice a suggestion?
That's very interesting because it certainly implies a bit of a schism, in Iranian politics right now. I'd be kind of curious to know what kind of support Ahmadinejad would receive, but the fact that he's openly defying the Ayatollah Khomeini it's really unprecedented, I believe, at least in that country.
Well, I do have an audio clip. Now, obviously, it's the voice of a translator, but I will play, and it's just a brief clip. I'll play it for you as to why he ran it, why he decided to do it.
Okay.
However, his advice did not mean I am barred from running. He said he was telling me either to come or not to come. It was just advice. There is extensive pressure on me from dear people of different walks of life as their small servant to come to the election scene.
That was the most sensible comment he made that I could find that had been translated in a audible fashion. But that definitely shows that Iran, who has what more or less is a moderate in power right now. Obviously, the Ayatollah really sets the policy, but
Rouhani is considered more moderate. Yeah.
Ahmadinejad is
he's certainly not as hardliner as Ahmadinejad. Yeah.
Ahmadinejad is a Holocaust denier. Was often the leader at the weekly chants of death to Israel, death to America, wipe Israel off the map, yada, 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 yada. That was usually him. We haven't seen as much of that lately with Rouhani.
No, you haven't.
I mean, it's happened, but it's usually on Iranian holidays. But before it used to be almost a weekly thing.
If Ahmadinejad goes through with it and continues to run, I don't see him winning. I mean, Rouhani has all the supports of the moderates. He would be favored to win, I would imagine, probably by a large margin. But I believe there's actually a couple other people running as well.
Oh, there's over 1,000 people that have
one of the former vice presidents, I think, is running. I mean, someone else too, who would split the hardliners. I forget his name, but one of the more conservative clerics is running as well. So it's not exactly an uncrowded field.
No, but here's where the field thins out.
Rouhani would certainly be favored.
Here's what thins out the field in Iran, and it's not primaries, Justin. I don't know how much you know about Iranian politics.
Not a whole lot.
Okay, you can register for the election, but then your credentials are vetted by a committee controlled by the supreme leader.
Yeah.
To see whether or not your name will remain on the ballot. And I think if the supreme leader truly didn't want Rouhani or Ahmadinejad back on the ballot, that will stop him. Like I said, they don't use
it certainly would.
Primaries.
Mm-hmm.
My only question is, okay, Ahmadinejad just went against the supreme leader. If they yank his name from the ballot, first of all, the world would know. Because you're not going to yank Mr. Former President, well-known figure, off the ballot without the world picking up on it. But my thing is, does he die about a year or two from now, if that's the case?
I don't know. I mean, I could certainly see him being left on the ballot and then being humiliated by a very low vote count, which would end his political career. It would probably force him out of the public eye. I could see it being more of a shame tactic than anything.
Okay.
I mean, because Ahmadinejad he's despised by the moderates in the country. I mean, even some of the people who were on his side want him out of the race because of his poor economic record. I mean, he's the one who got all the sanctions slapped on Iran way back in during his 2 terms.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see him gaining a whole lot of votes, and I think a thorough thrashing in the election would spell the end of his career and be embarrassing for him. I think that could be the punishment.
The end game. Yeah.
For defying the Ayatollah.
Okay. Obviously I always go to, are we going to find him dead from a car accident in a year?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously his brake lines would have been cut type car accident, but now of course China's going, back off US, back off. Don't do anything stupid. So, in terms of North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And North Korea did recently turn down several shipments of coking coal from China turned down several shipments of coking coal from North Korea, which is one of North Korea's primary sources of income. This could be interesting. And
very interesting to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah. And we also have troops going to Poland and the Ukraine for exercises, not necessarily right near the conflict, but definitely in the area. And for those of whom haven't kept up, Poland's now a member of NATO. Yes, it was the home of the Warsaw Pact, but after the breakup, it switched sides. I find that fascinating. I know that's just a crazy thing, but there's got to be at least a little bit of psychology over in Russia, especially with Putin, that the place where the Warsaw Pact was signed is now a member of NATO. That had to have been a gut punch.
Yeah, I would think so.
And Putin would love nothing more than to reconstitute the Soviet Union under new management, under a new name, but I'd have to say it would be one of those. It would be fascinating.
Very.
So, anything we didn't touch on? I think we've covered most of the globe today, Justin.
Yeah, we've bounced around quite a bit. Covered a lot.
Is there anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to mention?
No, I don't think so. I think we got to everything I had.
Everything you had, and then about 5 things I threw at you threw curveballs at you today.
Yeah.
Hey, at least I tried to give you the information while I was throwing the curveball. So. All right, well, why don't you remind people where they can hang out with you when you're not on the air hanging out with me?
Sure. So there's 2 good options. One is my Twitter account. It's Justin R_Kinney. You can find me there. I also have a Facebook page that's an author page. I've mentioned on here before, I like to write mystery novels in my spare time, and so my author page is J. Robert Kinney, and you can find me there as well.
All right, and as a reminder, folks, you can find me on Twitter at Jessies POV, or you can shoot me an email at the station, jessiespov@klrnradio.com. And on that note, and yes, I've been asked this question, I will answer it on air. If you want to get a message to Justin and you want it to be longer than a tweet or a Facebook post, you can email it to me at the station and I will get it to him. Okay? All right. On that note, folks, I'm out of here. All right, folks, actually, that isn't quite the end of the episode. I have just pulled some fresh show prep. Yes, a little bit of show prep for the last few minutes of the show since I started half an hour early. I just felt I would round out the show. Well, North Korea Airlines diversifies as threats of sanctions mount. Yes, the military-controlled airline expanded into consumer products in earnest in recent months. Visitors to the isolated country say it was not clear if the diversification into the domestic market was related to the loss of many international routes when the United Nations slapped economic sanctions on North Korea for its nuclear and missile tests. Yes, they now have branded cigarettes, branded Coca-Cola, or branded cola. I won't use the name Coke. Branded cola, branded cigarettes, and branded snack foods and things like that. Of course, Washington is now considering tougher measures, including a global ban on Air Koryo itself to punish North Korea for continuing its weapons tests. Hey, that would be interesting if the military-controlled airline, yes, it is military-controlled, as is most everything in that country, folks, couldn't land a plane. Now, as always, I will still never recommend going to Pyongyang, Tehran, or Damascus at present time. Personally, I'd love to go. Not under the current administrations in any three of those three countries. China may indeed agree to this kind of ban on Air Koryo, so it seems that China and the U.S. have reached an agreement that North Korea needs to be dealt with. But the question is whether Russia will agree to the sanctions. North Korean officials are rarely accessible to reporters, and of course, you just try and get a comment from one that makes sense. Yeah, right. It has currently a fleet of 15 planes, either Russian or Ukrainian made, and uses refueling and maintenance and repair facilities in China and Russia, according to aviation databases and UN documentation. The airline does have a number of domestic flights connecting Pyongyang to Urong, Sondok, and Samjeon towns, according to a schedule available last year. Businesses in secretive North Korea do not publicly share information about revenues or costs, so who knows what role the sanctions have in the airline's future. Now, in 2015, the military-controlled conglomerate launched its own brand of sky blue taxis, which now parade through the streets of Pyongyang alongside cabs from at least 8 other state-owned companies. Air Koryo colas and cigarettes are available in shops across Pyongyang, and they're starting to branch into started branching into soft drinks late last year. So, like I said, this could be interesting, folks. And of course, the airline's assets are actively used for military purposes. Outwardly, this seems like a commercial airline, folks. But don't count on any flight you board for North Korean Air being 100% commercial. So, and A South Korean professor said any sanctions on Air Koryo would have mostly a symbolic effect. It will not cause huge damage to the North Korean economy. Air Koryo is not a dollar box, which makes a lot of foreign money. I just found that fascinating, folks. Now, North Korea, of course, had a response, very predictable response, almost could have written this for them, about the USS Carl Vinson deployment. North Korea said it's not afraid of the USS Carl Vinson. Over the weekend, the fleet was being sent to the Indian Ocean to train with the Australian Navy after President Donald Trump said he was sending an armada to deter Kim Jong-un. Of course, the Pyongyang propaganda outlet issued a statement on Thursday in a 3-minute video that derided international sanctions against the country. The footage included subtitles without narration to criticize the sanctions and cutting to a video of North Korea's recent military parade commemorating the anniversary of the birth of Kim Il-sung. The message was clear. Pyongyang's weapons deployment would carry on regardless of sanctions. North Korea also had a message just for the Carl Vinson carrier group. The closer it approaches, the greater impact of the effect of annihilating punishment. We will not allow survival for those who threaten our existence. I'm sure the sailors on the Carl Vinson are sleeping soundly in their bunks at night. I'm sorry. I don't think they're worried about North Korean propaganda. All right, folks. As a reminder, please check out Battle Cries. There is a link to purchase it on Amazon right on the KLRN Radio website. It's on every page except the homepage, I believe. I know it's on the chat room and a couple other places. On that note, and you all know what's coming, I'm out of here!